Hello everyone and welcome back to Real Movie Talk. This is the show where we talk everything films and the industry that surrounds them. I'm your host Dec, and with me as always is Ben.
Welcome to the podcast.
Has been a while, a very long time. I think we are going to try and sort some stuff out for 2020 now that we are in the new year. New podcast. But we'll discuss that later on. But anyway, what we're going to do in this episode is we have a big one to cover here. We're going to be doing our top 10 films of 2019. These are our personal lists of the best films of the year. We're going to be taking in turns, going down from 10 to 1, giving you guys our best films of the year. And after that, we're also going to be discussing some of the films that we are most looking forward to for 2020, as we are now finally here. We're now at the start of the decade, and we've got some really good films coming out this year that we can't wait to talk about. So, that out of the way, I'm going to hand it over to you, Ben. You can kick us off with your number 10 pick.
Yeah, so number 10 for me, I don't know, it's very tight. Wait, first off, I'm just going to say some honorable mentions. No, I took them out just for you.
Good.
But I got a few honorable mentions I thought I would say. Ad Astra was very close to getting in. I loved Ad Astra. Pain and Glory, Doctor Sleep, Jay and Silent Bob, I really like that. And then it was either going to be Marriage Story or Dragged Across Concrete, and in the end I ended up going with Marriage Story. So Marriage Story is my number 10 pick. Noah Baumbach directed this, he wrote it, and I really love this film. I've seen it 3 times, and every time in the cinema, because I saw it at 2 film festivals. And it was great. I absolutely loved it. And I think it gets better every time I see it, even though I, loved it the first time. But anyway, so what I liked about it is it's just, it was so full of warmth, even though it was so kind of tragic at the same time. And, there is a real nastiness to, the divorce that's going on. And I loved Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver. I really, really think that Adam, he should win the Oscar. Although I'm I want Leonardo DiCaprio or him. I'm sort of half-half. But Adam seriously gives a career best performance, definitely his best. He really, really commands every emotion within him. And I feel like, the big scene in when you get to the fight, I was like, in the cinema, I literally was like, this guy has just got his Oscar, or at least his nomination 100%. Just for that. And yeah, it's so real, so intimate, and it's just really, really great. And it's quite, it's loving, even though it's so brutal at some points.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I've got Marriage Story on my list, so I'll talk about it more when I get to it. But yeah, Marriage Story, 100%, an amazing movie. So going over to my number 10 choice. Yeah, I'll just jump on to my number 10 choice. I have
to dip out. Yeah.
So while Ben is nipping out, I will do my number 10 choice. And my number 10 choice is Fighting With My Family. This was a movie. This is a lot more of a personal pick rather than a best pick, which is why I put it at number 10. This was a movie that I just absolutely fell in love with. I'm not even a fan of wrestling. I'm not a fan of the WWE. None of that. I just went into this movie mainly because it was directed by Stephen Merchant, which I was like, okay, I'm a huge fan of Stephen Merchant from The Office, Extras. I was really excited to see what he was going to do on a film scale, and this film was brilliant. I think it's so funny. I think it's so relatable. It's so lovely just to watch, and it's a great underdog story as well, which are always kind of these feel-good movies that by the end of it you always feel good. And I think that this film really opened my eyes to Florence Pugh, who has quickly become one of my favorite actresses of all time. Definitely my favorite actress of this year. I absolutely adore Florence Pugh, and this was kind of where I discovered her, which then led on to another performance, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. But this film, I just absolutely fell in love with it. I saw it twice in the same weekend. I couldn't believe how much fun I was having with it. And again, the script is what really jumped out to me the most, because it was written by Stephen Merchant. You could tell he had his kind of comedic hand, writing it. It was really, really witty in that way. Really great British humour, which for me works really well. So for me, Fighting With My Family, it was one of the more surprising movies of the year. I didn't expect to love it as much as I did, but I came away just absolutely in love with it, and absolutely in love with Florence Pugh, and that all came from this movie.
I think that's a really good pick. when I watched it at a film festival in Glasgow, and I haven't seen it since. I should watch it again. I absolutely loved it, but I haven't seen it since, and I sort of forgot about it for a while, which is a bit stupid of me. I definitely need to watch it again. I remember watching it, and I was like, "Who is this Florence Pugh?
Yeah,
Who
and
is she?
and
She
then the
is
year
so
she had,
fucking good." And then Midsummer comes,
yeah,
which we'll
and now
probably
Little
talk
Women
about
as well.
later. Yeah, and Little Women as well. So, yeah, all right. My number 9, that goes to, as we were talking about, Midsummer. So, I I love Midsummer. I really, really love it. And I'm kind of fighting. I was fighting with myself over, and not fighting with my family, fighting with myself over putting it higher on my list. And it definitely could switch. I think all of these films that are on my list are absolutely fantastic. And Midsummer was at the top of my list for most of the year, and I still absolutely love it. For comparison, I've seen, I think it was 113 films this year,
Jesus.
new films. So, I mean, my top like 25 are all amazing. Like, I love all of those. So, that's just for comparison if you're like, oh, number 9's not very good or whatever. But anyway, so Midsummer, I love Ari Aster. He has made some of the best short films I've ever seen. If you've ever seen them, you should definitely go check them out. But Hereditary last year was easily one of the best films of the year. One of the best horror films of the decade. One of the best films of the decade. And obviously, I was ecstatic to see his next film only a year after, which is amazing. And Midsummer really is amazing. It's about, the extent of grief and the struggles of codependency, relationships, and it's sort of this fairy tale like, in comparison to like a Wizard of Oz situation where you walk from the real world into this sort of mystical world of weird traditions that no one understands. And I really think this film shows that, Ari Aster is a director that, he should not be ignored.
No.
He is absolutely amazing. And what I love about his work is it's so detailed, and everything that is captured is on purpose, and it's so well thought out. And I really like the framing. Not enough people talk about like the impact of framing. Obviously, you talk about it when you think of a Wes Anderson film or something like that. But I really think Ari Aster really is in control of everything, and I really appreciate it, and I really love it. And it's a beautiful film. It's disturbing, and it's nightmare sort of inducing. And yeah, I wouldn't class it under the horror film. I wouldn't say it's a horror film. Some people would say it is. But it's that kind of line that it toes between like a fairy tale, horror, and sort of, yeah. So I think it's really, really amazing, and it really, really got to me. And at the end of the film, when I watched it for the first time, I think I've seen it 3 times now. When I watched it for the first time, I just came out and I was like, what the fuck? That was so disturbing, but so good. Like, I did not know what I had just watched.
Yeah.
And I went to see it again the next day, right after, because I was like, I have to watch this again.
Yeah, Midsummer is absolutely phenomenal. I do also have Midsummer on the list, so I'll come back to that later.
Okay.
But it is fantastic. I love it. And again, more Florence, which is never a bad thing. My number 9 is Joker. Joker is a film that I almost can't believe exists in some ways. It was a film that I've followed since its inception all the way up to its release, and just seeing through the development stages and things like that, seeing it actually come to cinemas was a massive moment. Joker is such a interesting experience because it has brought together like non-film fans, comic book movie fans, and also just non-comic book movie fans to kind of rejoice in this film, because I've spoken to so many people who have said that Joker, like, they don't like comic book movies, they don't like superheroes, anything like that, but they loved Joker. And even one person who I spoke to, just someone who I used to work with, she said to me that Joker was the best movie she had ever seen. While I wouldn't go that far, it's interesting to say that, this film is kind of having that sort of reach with people and showing people that comic book movies aren't the typical kind of stigma that people have for them. They kind of have evolved into other things. They kind of dip their toes into different genres and things like that. And Joker is the perfect example of that by being a really deep, dark, and personal character study for Arthur Fleck. Obviously, Joaquin Phoenix one of the best actors we have working today playing the Joker. His performance is unparalleled. Obviously, we all know how great Joaquin Phoenix is, but this is probably one of his best roles. I definitely think he's going to get a nomination. I still personally want to go for Adam Driver over Joaquin Phoenix, but he's going to get a nomination, absolutely for sure. Especially because this is a very performance-based movie, and for a performance-based movie, you really can't do better than what you get here with Arthur. And I also just think the way this movie kind of deals with certain themes, like how the world kind of ignores certain people, which can lead to certain things. And I even just loved all the other performances in the movie. Like Robert De Niro, I think really goes for it in this movie, which I really enjoyed. I just think like the vibe of the movie, the tone of it, it's very dark, it's dingy, it kind of feels enclosed and claustrophobic. And this movie has this level of tension where you're kind of just waiting for things to happen. And anytime anything does happen, although you're expecting it, it does come across as a shock. Like anytime that like a gunshot goes off, it feels earned. Especially with the end shot of the movie, of course, where he kills Murray. It's such a interesting film to me. Another joke, Murray. But I just think it's a really, really interesting film that I think, especially for someone like Todd Phillips, who I never thought Todd Phillips was exactly the greatest director, just based on his track record. But I think he really knocked it out of the park with this movie. And even from a technical aspect, the score for this movie is fantastic, as is the cinematography. I just think that this film really transcended the superhero genre, unlike any film has before. I mean, I've said that about films like Logan and The Dark Knight and Captain America the Winter Soldier, but this film really did that. This film really transcended the genre and became something else entirely, and that's why I think it deserves a spot on the top 10.
I agree, and I won't say anything more as of right now. So let's move on to my number 8 pick. I have The Nightingale from the director of The Babadook. Have you seen The Babadook?
I've not, no. I do want to, though.
One of the best films of the decade. You got to see it. It's absolutely terrifying. And The Nightingale is from Jennifer Kent, who directed that. And it's a sort of Tasmanian grief tale that is on a kind of revenge streak. So basically, it's in Tasmania. Something happens. Basically, someone's killed, and it's someone that is quite disturbing. And then basically, this girl, Claire, she goes on a sort of mission across Tasmania to try and kill the soldiers or get to the soldiers that killed her baby. Okay. There you go. So yeah, this film is absolutely amazing. It's Jennifer Kent's second feature, and it's really unforgettable. It's shot in a sort of Academy ratio where it's, like The Witch or like The Lighthouse this year, and you really are confined to the world of, what she's going through in this whole film, and it is very nightmarish, and it's this sort of historic gothic that really shows how good of a director Jennifer Kent is, and the cinematography is some of the best of the whole year. It's beautiful, and it's really quite staggering, and, obviously it shows the real atrocities of, the nature of soldiers in a war. This was back in, I think it was late 19th century. I could be wrong about that. But anyway, so it's a really, really well-made film. It's really affecting, and it's definitely one of the best films I've seen this year. So, yeah, The Nightingale, number 8.
Yeah, and I've heard about you talking about this movie, I think, all year. I think this is one of the earlier films you saw this year.
Watch it at Sundance, yeah.
Yeah. Funny enough, I actually saw this movie pop up on Apple TV recently, so it's now available to stream and stuff, so I'll definitely give it a go. So my number 8 is a movie that I'm actually surprised is on my top 10, especially at number 8. It's actually, I think I had it at number 10 when it came out, and it's just moved up more and more for me. The more I think about it, the more I realize how great it is, and that's The Irishman. The Irishman, obviously, this is essentially the Avengers for Martin Scorsese, with him to direct, and then you have Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, getting Joe Pesci out of retirement, even Harvey Keitel's in this. This is just a huge collection of the best stars of the genre, of the gangster, mobster genre, coming together to create this absolute masterwork. 3.5 hours, which sounds like a lot, but when you're watching it, if you get engrossed in it, it's just, it almost doesn't feel like long enough. I think that this film, it's very deep and it's very personal, and it's one of those films that is very character driven. If you get into it and you really start to buy into the characters, I think that that is where the joy mostly comes from, especially because this film is so competently handled. Like, Scorsese is completely in his element here, so being able to take that particular genre and do all the tricks and with all the bells and whistles with it, I think Scorsese just really excels with this kind of content. And the performances, again, because it's such a performance-based movie, I think that the performances in particular really shine through. Like, Robert De Niro is great in this, Pacino is amazing, and I think the standout is definitely Pesci. Obviously, him coming out of retirement for this is a huge thing, and this is such a different performance from him. It's very understated, it's very refined, it's very restrained, and I think that that particular performance, it stands out the most because it's so different than what we know him for. Like, Al Pacino is basically just Al Pacino, but like, and that's great, like, it's fantastic, but, you know, seeing Pesci do this very different role that really is kind of borderline terrifying, I think is what really makes it stand out. And again, it's these three characters, this trio, that really kind of bring you into this film to kind of take you across this, you know, huge spanning story that goes off so many years. And that brings me to talk about the CGI, which the de-aging is practically perfect for most of the movie. I think the first scene is a bit dodgy, but other than that, it's pretty much perfect for the rest of the movie, and it's so impressive to see this technology used to an extent where it's basically used for an entire film, and we get to see them both older and younger all the way through their lives. It's such an interesting story as well, the way they tied it in with the, you know, US politics and things like that, and the politics of the time and the era, and the law side of things. You know, I think that another standout character for me was Ray Romano. I thought he was brilliant in this. Like, Ray Romano is an actor who I always forget about, and then he shows up, and I realize how much I love him. So seeing him show up here as, like, De Niro's lawyer was great. So yeah, The Irishman is just, it's a collection of all the best bits of the genre. If you love the genre, you'll absolutely love what The Irishman has to offer. And for me, this film, it just gets better and better the more I think about it. And as time goes on, it just gets more revered for me in my head.
I agree, and we'll talk about that later. But number 7 for me is Little Women. Little Women, I've seen it 3 times as well, and Little Women is so amazing. It's a film that I never want to leave. Similar to The Irishman and like Once Upon a Time, it's like you know, the world that's created is like, I would relate it to like Harry Potter or something. I want to go to Hogwarts. I want to be there. I want to be in this world of Little Women, even though obviously there's hardships and stuff like that, but it's so full of warmth. And it's like a hug that you never want to let go of. And it's really just one of the best films I've seen this year. I think Greta Gerwig is absolutely amazing. Lady Bird was my favorite film, along with Blade Runner 2049 in 2017. And this is one of my favorite films this year. This could, like I said, with some of these, they could easily flip up and down. It could be, you know, in a, say 2 years from now, it could be like, looking back, my favorite or something of the year. But anyway, so it's really amazing the way that Greta Gerwig is able to sort of handle the tone, the changing moods, and she really finds a perfect chemistry between the whole cast. My favorites, if I had to pick, I love the whole cast, is definitely Saoirse Ronan, Emma Watson, Florence Pugh, and Timothy. I think they're all fantastic, and, you know, I couldn't ask for a better cast, and I really feel like she, I'm talking about Greta, is in full control of everything she's doing. And I feel the feeling that I got was, you know, a sense of like relaxation, because, you know, I was fully absorbed in her world, and I love Little Women. So that's why it's my number 7.
I'm really excited to see Little Women myself. I'm seeing it tomorrow. I'm very, very excited, because that's one thing I should mention about my list, is that a lot of like the big kind of awards movies that you would expect on a lot of top 10s, I haven't got on mine, because unlike Ben, who gets to see them early in festivals and press screenings, stuff like that, I don't, so I have to wait until they come out here in the UK, which is usually in January, February. So films like Jojo Rabbit, Parasite, things like that, I've not seen them yet. Although I'm also seeing Jojo tomorrow, so there is that as well. Maybe that'll be on the top 10, who knows. But anyway, I'll jump on to my number 7, which for me is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. For me, I kind of went into this not knowing what to expect, because Tarantino can be kind of hit or miss with me. There are some films of his, I've not seen every single one of his films yet, but the ones I have seen, some of them I really love, and some of them I think are fine. So it was kind of this thing where I don't know where it was going to go. But for me, Once Upon a Time absolutely was a fantastic experience. Being this, especially watching it in IMAX, I think really helped with this because it's kind of this experience where you just get lost in the world. And that's my favorite part of this movie is the world building and just being in 1960s Hollywood. Like everyone could, like I saw when the movie came out, a lot of people were complaining about the scenes of Brad Pitt just kind of driving around, but they were honestly some of my favorite scenes in the movie. Just him exploring the world and just being able to explore it with him, I found really engrossing. It just helped me sink into the movie and the story a little bit more, or well, lack thereof story, if you will. But even the lack of story didn't bother me. I think that the lack of the story allowed me to kind of dive into the characters a bit more. Like Leonardo DiCaprio is absolutely engrossing in his character because he's so almost sympathetic in a way where he's this actor who almost feels out of touch. He's an actor who feels like he's, gone past his golden years. He's kind of just sitting around, almost selling out in some ways. And I found that particular story very, very interesting, especially for an actor like Leo to take on. And I think that his performance, especially when it culminates in that scene with him kind of freaking out in the trailer, as funny as that is, like I find it absolutely hysterical. I think it's one of the funniest moments of the year. It's also got this level of sadness beneath it, which I think Leo pulls off brilliantly. And then on the other side, we have Cliff Booth, of course, played by Brad Pitt, who, again, fantastic character, like this stuntman, absolute badass who can take on, he can take on Bruce Lee. I just thought, I know again some people had complaints with that, but again, I thought it worked so well for the character and so well for the movie, and I absolutely loved it. And the way that these two characters eventually culminate with the big fight at the end in the house it's probably the most batshit scene of the year, to be honest. And it's so entertaining because of it. Just the way that like Brad unleashes the dog on them and stuff like that. And of course, this kind of does what Inglourious Basterds did, where it kind of rewrites history and how Tarantino kind of wanted history to go. And Sharon Tate was basically all one big red herring, which again, I didn't really mind because the red herring thing, you have so many scenes with Sharon Tate in this movie where it's completely separate from the main story. It's completely on its own and it eventually comes to nothing. But again, kind of like the Brad Pitt driving scenes, it's just fun to explore the world and kind of be within the world and explore different areas of it. And that's what Margot Robbie allows you to do. So again, all these different elements, for some people, they may not work at all, but for me, I really enjoyed it. And for me, it created this overall experience for Once Upon a Time that I was able to really sink into. And it was a really memorable movie for me.
I absolutely agree. We'll talk about that later. All right, number 6, Portrait of a Lady on Fire. I don't think you've seen that yet, right?
No, I've not, no.
Yeah, so I saw this at the the Zurich Film Festival. Funny story. So I go in, I'm like, yay, gonna watch the film that won the best screenplay at Cannes. So I'm super excited. I go in and turns out, because I'm in Zurich, obviously they speak German, it's Switzerland, and no English subtitles. Okay.
Oh.
So I go in and it's a French film, German subtitles. I'm like, oh shit.
Bit screwed.
What am I going to do? Lucky I speak German, or I'm better at understanding German than better at understanding than speaking. So actually, by the end of the film, I was able to understand. I actually understood practically it all, and I was really surprised. But then I don't think it, because I was, thinking about the language a lot and stuff like that. So first time I was like, I love this film. But then second time, sort of English subtitles, I was able to fill in some of the gaps. And since then, I've seen it 3 times, and I am absolutely in love with this film. I really think there is sort of this nature to it that's quite undescribable. The sensation and like contagiousness that it gives off, and I think that's really down to the direction, the cinematography, all paired with the performances, because it's so intimate. I think it's maybe the most intimate film I've ever seen, and really it has just a feeling. That's how I would describe it. It creates a feeling, and it has this elegance and this sort of element of like the sublime, in the cinematography, the direction, and how everything's done. And it's so passionate. You can tell the filmmaker Celine Sciamma is really, really, just in love with everything she's doing. And I think it's really just one of the best films of the year. And it's very, very overloading in terms of, it's like, and just the effect it gives off on you. So go check out Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
Yeah, I think it comes out in February here in the UK, so I'll definitely be checking that out. Very excited to see that myself. Number 6, and this is quite an interesting one for us, really, because this is a film that, kind of like Joker, but more specifically for this podcast, we've followed this movie pretty much ever since it was announced, and I remember each episode we did, there was another cast member announced and things like that. So this movie's quite interesting. That movie's Knives Out. Knives Out is one of the most fun experiences I've had all year at the cinema. And I've seen this movie twice now, and after the second time, I fell in love with it even more. Rian Johnson is a director that I find really interesting because obviously he's directed so many great films like Brick and Looper, and then he did The Last Jedi, which obviously sent him into a spiral of controversy. I really like The Last Jedi. That's my opinion on it. I really like The Last Jedi. Not my favourite Star Wars movie or anything, but I really like it. So I was really excited to see what he was going to do next. And for him to take on an original murder mystery story was something that I found particularly exciting. Especially when they started to reveal this cast. This is one of the best ensembles of the year. Maybe the best ensemble, potentially. I think there's an argument to be made for that, at least. I think that some of the standout performances, obviously Ana de Armas, who I have just been standing for a long time, seeing her get a real lead performance, I was so pleased with. And she is fantastic here, as is Chris Evans. I loved his performance in particular. Jamie Lee Curtis is great. Toni Collette is fantastic. Michael Shannon. Everyone, really. And of course, for me, the biggest standout kind of was Daniel Craig, just because I think his performance is so off the wall and so crazy that it really jumps out of the screen. But also, it's the first time in a while where it felt like Daniel Craig was actually having fun in a role. I feel like with the recent Bond films, as much as I've enjoyed them, he has felt a bit bored in them, it looks like. Whereas here, he really looked like he was having a great time. And the character of Benoit Blanc, I really hope they do more films with him, because that is a character I want to follow. But this film, the trials and tribulations it goes through, the twists and turns, I found it very, very enthralling. I think that the kind of story, the way it goes, I didn't personally predict it. I felt like there was a prediction midway through the movie that I had that was pretty much on, but then they kind of do a secondary twist, which I found very, very exciting because I didn't see that coming at all. But also this movie's expertly shot, especially like this. There's a shot in the trailer which is absolutely fantastic where Rian Johnson kind of does this dolly shot. It's fantastic the way it's done. The kind of cinematography throughout is really, really expertly handled. I think from a direction standpoint, I think this film is probably Rian Johnson's best in regards to direction. I think he really nails it here. And I think Knives Out is one of the most rewatchable and most fun movies. Like, for a whodunit, I think this movie is super rewatchable, which can be difficult. So I think to say that it's rewatchable, I think just really lends good credit to it. And Knives Out it was a movie I was really looking forward to. I think it was one of my most anticipated of the year, and it did not disappoint. If anything, it exceeded my expectations.
I really, really agree with you, and it's amazing. I've seen it a lot of times. It's not on my list, but it's very close behind. And yeah, it's really amazing. We were like going through the castings every week. We were like, oh, who's in it next?
Yeah, this person,
Daniel Craig, Chris Evans, Ana de Armas. What? And it really, really paid off. It's absolutely amazing. And yeah, that would be an honorable mention that I forgot to mention. But yeah, all right. Number 5 for me is The Lighthouse, directed by Robert Eggers. It's really, really amazing. And I love The Witch, but I think this is on another level. I think this is like really like sort of nearing kind of masterpiece level, honestly, because I was completely struck by this film, and especially Robert Eggers, and he's able to direct and frame everything, and everything has impact, and you can't stop thinking about the choices and different elements of the film, you know, how it's shot, the black and white, the framing, everything like that. It's just really, really perfect. And I think that, you know, the way it uses the camera to actually show that sense of confinement, similar to The Nightingale, really is absolutely fantastic. And it really creates this maddening effect where everything is sort of spiraling and you just can't help but be like, oh, you like your mind's going crazy watching it. And it's really like a unstoppable force of like dark nature, and it's one of the best films this year. Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson are preposterously good. Like they are that good that I'm like, these guys need to be nominated for like Oscars, but they're probably not going to be, which is sad. But they are so good, and you know, I think everything about this film works so well. The direction, how well it's written, that has to be said. It's incredibly well researched, and the language and the way it comes off is very kind of Shakespearean and very. It relates to a lot of the. I don't know if you've read any of the poetry. Like if you were forced to in school, like I was forced to read a lot of poetry. Like there's this poem called "The Rime of the Ancient Mariner." Basically, there's this. I don't know if you've seen the film. Have you seen the film
No,
yet?
I've not seen it yet. No.
Spoiling something. There is a bird in this film, and a bird gets kind of fucked up, right? And that's very similar to this poem. And, you know, it's like the effect of, you know, your actions. And I think it's very religious and it has this sort of mythic quality to it. And I just think it's really, really full of depth. And I just adore it every time I've seen it. I've seen it twice now. And, you know, I really can't wait to watch it again. So, yeah, Lighthouse #5.
I'm really excited to see The Lighthouse. That is finally coming out this month in the UK, so I'm excited to check that out for sure. My number 5 is Booksmart. This film absolutely floored me. For a directorial debut from Olivia Wilde, I mean, you can't really do much better than this. I think that, you know, the two leads here with Beanie Feldstein and Caitlin Dever, they do absolutely phenomenal work here, especially establishing a relationship between these two people who I genuinely bought had been friends for a very long time, and I really bought into their friendship, especially because it felt like that friendship transcended off the screen into real life, and that always helps. And I think that this film, while yes, it tells a basic and simple story, it's one that, you know, is kind of very relevant and timely for today, especially as, you know, someone who is quite young and someone who very recently kind of left high school and things like that. It's something that I felt was very, very relative and something that I felt was very real in that sense. And I think that Booksmart is just a perfect representation of that, especially because people obviously compare this movie to Superbad. And yeah, it is Superbad in a lot of ways, but also it has a lot of its own merits to it. And I think that it has a lot of its own themes. It goes a lot deeper than, you know, than Superbad ever did. I think this film has a lot more going for it, has a lot more riding on it, and this film goes a lot further into genre than Superbad did. And I think that this film has so much more riding on its coattails than just, you know, just being a straight up comedy, which I think some of the trailers may have implied. But even when you look at the comedy, it's absolutely hilarious. There are so many scenes in this movie that I remember as being some of the funniest of the year. I think that there's so much good writing here, and I think that, especially because these actors have such good chemistry, they can really pull off those lines and pull off those interactions together. So for me, Booksmart is just, it's one of those films that is one of the most rewatchable of the year. It's one I will definitely come back to time and time again, and one that I think will definitely kind of stick around as far as being a very relevant high school-esque film, but one that also is for all audiences rather than just a teen audience. So I think that this film did a lot more than it actually got credit for.
All right. I really like Booksmart, and I agree, and that is very, very close to my top 10. Number 4 for me
I'm
is
really
Joker.
surprised that's not in your top 10.
But it was, you know, I've loved a lot of films this year.
It's true.
Anyway, so number 4 is Joker. So mine's a bit higher than yours. Of the best films I've seen this year as well, and it's really kind of breathtaking, and it's definitely a, you know, quite a lot to take in first time. There's so much going on, but when you watch it over and over again, you really get the impact of, you know, how amazing this film is, and it really, really disturbs you, sort of contorts you. and it finds a real good line between tragedy, comedy, and obviously the superhero stuff, which it definitely transcends the superhero genre. It's something more. It's gritty, it's dark, and it's quite beautiful, which is obviously a contrast to the darkness of the film. And I think Todd Phillips has done an excellent job, and the cinematography is beautiful. Joaquin is absolutely amazing. He's out of this world as the clown prince of crime. And I really liked it. And I really liked how it was just completely different, and it defied all the expectations of, a comic book character in a film. I would say it's more like Todd Phillips has made a Joaquin Phoenix film than, Joaquin Phoenix is in a comic book film or something like that. And I think it's really breathtaking, and I love it to bits. I've seen it 5 times.
Yeah. I mean, Joker is, as I mentioned earlier, it is one of the best films of the year. It's absolutely outstanding. For me, my number 4, I can't imagine this is going to be on a lot of people's lists, just based on the controversy. But for me, I absolutely loved it, and that was The Rise of Skywalker. I mean, I can't really defend this film from a critical standpoint because the writing is quite poor at times, and the conveniences are very obvious and kind of very forced at times. And I think the movie has a lot of issues, but I think that The Rise of Skywalker, personally, as a fan,
I knew you'd say that.
Like, just purely, personally, as a fan, I loved The Rise of Skywalker. I had such a blast with this film. I absolutely loved the story it had. I really enjoyed the character arcs within it. I really loved, especially with, my favorite character throughout this entire sequel trilogy has been Kylo Ren. What they did with him was so satisfying. And I think that as a conclusion to not only this trilogy, but as a conclusion to the Skywalker saga, I think it does a lot right. And I think that it does a lot to... Because, you can't please every Star Wars fan. No one hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans do. And, for me, as a Star Wars fan, and no one else, I don't care about anyone else, I loved it. And I think that this is a great conclusion. I've seen it twice. I'm going to see it again because I can't get enough of it. I think it has a lot going for it. I really enjoy all the different elements. I don't want to talk about it too much because I don't want to spoil anything, and it's still pretty recent, but yeah, I think that this film is great. And again, it's not the best Star Wars movie, it's not my personal favorite or anything like that, but it's honestly up there for me, and I really loved it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I loved it. The first time I watched it, I was a bit overwhelmed at the start, and then it got better and better as it went on. And yeah, there are problems, but upon rewatching the film, you're able to look past them and just enjoy the film.
Yeah, and one thing
I'd
like to say is that I think a lot of people expect too much from Star Wars these days. I think a lot of people are kind of looking at Star Wars and going, oh, especially after The Last Jedi, which is funny because everyone's kind of turning back on The Last Jedi now. They're saying, oh, well, it wasn't that bad. But, Rian Johnson with The Last Jedi, he really delivered like an actual film, whereas... Yeah. I think that Star Wars, a lot of people forget, and a lot of people don't like hearing this, but Star Wars are kids' movies. And, everyone talks about how great the original trilogy is and how, weak the sequel trilogy is. But at the end of the day, I honestly think quality-wise, they're about the same. And I think that, there are a lot of things that the sequel trilogy does better than the originals. And there's a lot of stuff the originals do better than the sequels as well. But I think that, people hold the original trilogy to such a high revere that purely comes from nostalgia, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but I genuinely believe that comes from nostalgia because I think a lot of people have kind of this nostalgia vision when looking at those films, when in reality, they're pretty much on the same level of quality as these new films. And I think it kind of looks bad on these new films when, in my opinion, they're equally as good in quality, but they get so much more controversy and they get so much more negativity thrown towards them. So I think that people expect too much from Star Wars these days, and I think if you look at The Rise of Skywalker as a film within the saga itself, I think it works so well, and I think it's great.
Well, like last year, my list included Fantastic Beasts and Aquaman, so
yeah, exactly.
Well, I'll accept it. All right, my number 3.
I nearly put Charlie's Angels on, so
I like Charlie's Angels a lot.
I love Charlie's Angels.
Okay, my number 3. Don't have too long left, so I'm going to try and speed this up. But I couldn't decide, and I know this is against the rules, but I've got a reasoning why I've done this, okay? So these two films were released in 2018 in other countries. So it's Never Look Away and Sunset. So Never Look Away is a German film, got nominated for Best Cinematography, Best Foreign Film last year. Sunset played at the festivals in 2018. So I saw it 2 years ago, basically from now. And my problem was I didn't know if I was going to put it on the list or not because I was like, well, Sunset got 2019 released in America, but I ranked it in my 2018 list because I saw it then. And Never Look Away came out last year in America. So, but whatever. So I love both these films, and that's my reasoning for putting them together because I was kind of like confused as to, if I was going to put it on or not. Anyway, so quickly, Never Look Away is the best looking film I've ever seen. It's the best cinematography I've ever seen, and that's not me just saying that because I saw it, a few months ago or something like that. It's genuinely that good looking. I think it's the best cinematography I've ever seen, and that's a big statement. It has this powerful quality that really sort of overwhelms, and beyond like all the images captured, it's really just a vision of pure wonder and beauty, sorrow and expression, because it's about this artist and what he was able to do and what he wasn't able to do because of the war and the wall in Berlin and everything like that. And this is really a director and cinematographer, actors working in complete unison to really create an overwhelming experience, and it's quite poetic in the end. And Never Look Away is one of my favorite films of the decade. Sunset is, again, it's a foreign film. It's from Hungary, and really, really intense. It's sort of, I would relate it to kind of Mother in the way it's shot, because most of the shots we follow behind or in front of our character, and basically everything's through a confined perspective. It's shot beautifully on 35 millimeter, and it's backed by incredible set design, these extremely intense long takes. And I really love the ambiguity of the film, because you feel this film, you feel everything around it, and you sort of make your own way through this darkness that you've seen. And I love the way that the narrative sort of reels you in as you begin to create your own pictures of, the greater metaphors and everything that the film tries to embody. And I think it's really successful, and it's really gone underlooked. I think everyone needs to see Sunset. It's one of the best films of the year and of the decade.
I mean, I remember you talking about Never Look Away when we were talking about the Oscars last year, because I do remember that film being nominated for Best Cinematography and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely a good choice for you. I'll let you have it. So my number 3 is Marriage Story. Obviously, we mentioned it earlier. Marriage Story, I won't ramble on too long about it. We've already spoken about it, but it's phenomenal. 2 of the best performances of the year. Adam Driver is my pick to win Best Actor, and I think that ScarJo should probably win Best Actress, maybe. I don't know. There is actually another choice I'll talk about in my next one, but I think that it's a phenomenal film, fantastic writing, great music, and I think that this film is uncomfortable at times, but it's also lovely at others. A very interesting film, very interesting watch, and it's a film that I honestly found unforgettable, so I loved it.
Yep. Absolutely brilliant. And my number 2 is one you've already talked about. It's The Irishman. So there is 2 films this year, well, 3 films, including Never Look Away, that really have sort of defined the year for me. And The Irishman is one of them. And it's one of Scorsese's best films. And that's coming from me. And I've seen nearly all of his films. I've seen, I don't know how many, but I've seen Goodfellas like a billion times. I think I've seen it in cinema like 3 times. Like every time it's back on, I'm like straight there. Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, Mean Streets, the list goes on. I fucking love this guy. I love Scorsese. And so obviously it was one of my most anticipated this year, and it really, really hit everything right. And it was beautiful, shot so well, but it was beautiful in, you know, the themes and how it portrays everything. It's sort of this nice mix between Goodfellas and the sort of pace of silence, which is a bit slower. And The Irishman really reminded me of, like, I would say this is like Scorsese's The Godfather. If you've seen The Godfather, it's sort of more meandering and a bit more sort of, you know, it looks back on itself. And I think this is a very mature gangster film that Scorsese, you know, couldn't make 20 years ago when he made like 20, 30 years ago when he made like Goodfellas or something. It has that same energy, but it sort of progresses to something completely on another level. Even though Goodfellas is still my favorite Scorsese film, The Irishman is right up there. It's very different, so I wouldn't compare them together. But, you know, there is similar themes, obviously, in the gangster side of it. But it balances this violence, the sort of melancholy of these aging sort of people, and, you know, the dishonesty that has gone on in their lives, and, you know, how they look back and everything like that. I think it's so beautifully done, and I found myself kind of choking up a bit, to be honest, towards the end of the film. And so Scorsese, one of the best directors ever, he's done a fantastic job in this. I think it's really well written, shot beautifully. I absolutely love the use of music. I really, really have to be adamant about that, about all his films, is the music that finds some rhythm in his films that, you know, continues it throughout. And I think that's quite overlooked. And Al Pacino, I think, delivers one of his best performances ever, to sort of rival his very best in like The Godfather and such and such. And De Niro, Joe Pesci, absolutely fantastic as usual. I really have a hard experience trying to compare Al Pacino to De Niro to Pesci, because I think they're all fantastic. And, you know, the greater cast, man, there's so many good actors in this, and everyone is performing to their very best. And The Irishman is my number 2.
Makes a lot of sense for you. I knew The Irishman was going to be pretty high up for you. My number 2 is a movie that we've also already spoken about. My number 2 is Midsummer. Midsummer was a movie that just came out and completely took my breath away. I mean, Hereditary is absolutely fantastic. As you say, Ari Aster, I think, is one of the best directors we have. Especially, he's done so little, but to kind of leave such an impression is really impressive. And Midsummer, I think, is even better than Hereditary for me personally. What struck me about about Midsummer, is that everything that happens in this film is real, and that is what makes it scary to me. Like, I know you were saying you're not quite sure if you class this as a horror movie, things like that. I personally do class this as a horror film. I can understand, obviously, why people don't, and I, in a way, I also don't myself, but in other ways I do. And I think that where this horror kind of comes from in this movie is the fact that it's all horror in reality. This is all things that could actually happen. Far-fetched, yes, but it could actually happen. Unlike Hereditary, which, you know, the only thing I didn't really like about Hereditary is that it went a bit, you know, supernatural towards the end.
Ooh. I disagree, but carry on.
Bit of a hot take, but that was the part of it I didn't like. What I love about Midsummer is that it's so real. And I think, honestly, the scariest scene of this movie, and the scariest scene of the year for me personally, I think this is absolutely horrific, is the scene where you see what Danny's sister does to herself and her family. Like, the way that's shot, the way it trails up the stairs, and the hose from the car. I was literally sweating during that.
Remember
scene.
Watching it the first time?
Yes.
What was your?
Yeah, it was absolutely.
What was your reaction?
Horrifying. Like, I could feel my palms sweating up. I could feel like my body temperature racketing up. It was just absolutely horrifying. And this then leads into a scene where we see, you know, I've spoken about Florence Pugh already, but I have to bring it up again. The Academy won't do it, but in my opinion, this is the best performance of the year. Florence Pugh in this movie, absolutely groundbreaking. The way she cries in this movie, in particular, is the most realistic crying I have ever seen in a movie. It is insane. Like, it is the most realistic depiction of grief in a person I have ever seen in my life, and she won't get nominated for this. I think there is a chance she might get nominated Best Supporting for Little Women, but she will not get nominated Best Lead for this, which is, in my opinion, a criminal move. This is the best performance of the year, and I will fight that to the day I die. But I love Midsummer. It's amazing.
Absolutely great. I just love that film. Like seriously, like I said earlier, it's ninth on my list, but it could be number two by tomorrow. So, it's really that good. Okay, so my number one pick of 2019, I think this is very predictable. What is it? It is Avengers Endgame. I'm joking. It's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Okay, so Once Upon a Time, surprise, surprise, is Tarantino's newest film, and he is my favorite director. I've seen every film. I've watched his films God knows how many times. I've watched this film. I watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Wait, Declan, guess. You might know already.
6
times in the cinema.
God.
That is insane. I think that's the most anyone's gone to the cinema. So yeah, I was obsessed with this film, and I'm still obsessed with it. I watched it again on DVD the other day because I got it, and yeah, so there is something that the film actually does. It's this sort of feeling of like you're sort of beguiled into this world, and you just don't want to leave. It's like Little Women, like my comparison to Hogwarts. How I just want to be in this world. I want to be with Rick Dalton screaming and swearing at hippies. I just do, and it's Tarantino's sort of fantastical fairy tale about 1960s Hollywood and what could have happened. And I know a lot of people say there's no story to it, but I really think that there is a story. I think the story is about these characters more so than an overall sort of narrative arc that obviously they connect by the end. Rick finally meets Sharon at the end and stuff like that. But it's all around this tension with Manson, and I really appreciate how he was barely in the film, but he was there the whole time. You felt him the whole time, his presence. It was sort of like a ticking clock, and it's, absolutely one of the best films of the decade. I actually ranked it number 5 on the best of the decade for me, and it's really one of Tarantino's best, and that's saying a lot because I love every single one of his films. I genuinely think all his films are 5 stars. Maybe Kill Bill 1 could be like a 4.5. But yeah, that's coming from me. I think this is my third favorite if I were to rank after Django and Jackie Brown. But seriously, it's sort of absolutely like mystical. It's completely nostalgic, and you feel his exhilaration for the topic and for everything going on. You really feel these characters. These characters are so real. And, the relationship between Rick and Cliff, and then you got Sharon. I loved every single bit about this film, and every scene I'm just waiting to happen. I'm just like, yes, this is fucking amazing. This is everything I want. And this is really, especially once I got, on my first watch, once I got to the scene where Sharon is at the Playboy Mansion and the music comes on, it's Son of a Loving Man. I've been listening to all the songs. When that came on, I was like, just in the cinema, I just said to myself, I was like, this is why I love films. Yeah. This is all I want to see. This is all I want to do if I make films in the future. This is what I love. And this is what Tarantino is about. The colors, the nostalgia, the feeling he creates in all his films is really unlike any other filmmaker. You can try and copy Tarantino, but you can't make a Tarantino film. And I think this is really what he's able to capture, and really encapsulates everything what I like about films. And obviously the acting is fantastic on all fronts. I have to give a shout out to Julia Butters, the little kid in it. She's amazing. Yeah. As well as Margaret Qualley, who plays Pussy.
Yeah.
Pussycat. And, I could talk about them all. They are all so freaking good. But also it's beautifully shot. It has this sort of texture. Obviously it's shot on film. It has it could be made in the 1960s. And that is the feeling that he creates. He really absorbs you into this world. And, it's directed by one of the best directors ever. Written, the best screenplay of the year, in my opinion. I think what could contend with a screenplay like this would be, say, like a Midsummer or The Lighthouse or um, something like that. But yeah, this is my number one film, easily by far my favorite of the year.
Yeah, I mean that's not really a surprise coming from you, as a big Tarantino fan. So my number one, I'll just quickly get into it. Not really a surprise, and it's the most casual choice ever, but Avengers Endgame. um, I'd be dishonest with myself if it was an Endgame. I've never had a greater cinematic experience than watching this film at the midnight screening, just in a room filled with fans. The visceral reaction I had to this film was unlike anything else. As a fan who's been there for many, many years, not from the very beginning, but pretty much from a couple of years in all the way to now, the payoffs of this movie, the way it just goes and goes and just continues to build and build to this crescendo that is just absolutely orgasmic. I could not believe what I was watching at times. And I've never been, like, I hear a lot in American reviews for films, a lot of people talk about these audience reactions. People talk about, like, people start clapping during the movie. I've never experienced that until this movie. Like, the scene where Cap picks up Mjolnir, my audience cheered. I have never come across that before. And normally I thought that would be something that would annoy me, but I was in an environment where we were all on the same page. We were all fans. We were all here for this moment. That I joined in. It was just a knee-jerk reaction that I couldn't stop myself from doing. It just happened. And, you know, people were like clapping Robert Downey Jr. by the end of the film and stuff like that. It was just absolutely phenomenal. And I've just never experienced anything like it. I wish I could go back and live that day again just so I could, you know, actually experience this again. Because not only watching this movie for the first time, but just being in that kind of space, it was just absolutely something else. And the film itself is absolutely groundbreaking. Like, yeah, it may not be the absolute top tier Marvel film, but I think it is still an incredibly good one. I think the Russo brothers knocked it out of the park, as they have done with every single film that they've done for the MCU. And I think that this film is just the perfect culmination. I couldn't have asked for anything better. This film pays off every arc, it pays off every character, it pays off every movie, it pays off every little interaction. It has so many great callbacks. It's just a film that keeps giving and giving and giving. And if you're a fan, you will get so much out of this. This film was 2.5 hours. I would have been happy if it was 4. Like, this film is just, it has so much to give for the fans. And if you are a fan, it's the most rewarding experience and the most rewarding film you could possibly ever see. And for me, Endgame, it was phenomenal. Again, is it the best film of the year? No. But in terms of experience, I've never experienced anything like it. And I'd be lying to myself if I didn't put it at number one.
I think that's a great pick. Honestly, that's really, really close behind. I still think it's the best Marvel film. I think maybe the reason why it's not on my list is only because I feel like I don't know if it stands alone that well. Maybe that's part of the reason. But that being said, every time I saw this film, and I saw it 4 times, I cried at the exact same point. I think I cried like 4 times every time, and it really got to me. And there was really, honestly, one of the best moments of the year was that moment when everyone returns.
Yeah.
I literally, my jaw was like hanging off. I was shaking. I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
I was dying at that moment, and yeah, I that's really close behind. I loved it, and I can really appreciate it being that high up.
Yeah, I couldn't not. But anyway, that draws this episode of Real Movie Talk to a close. I did mention at the start we were going to be doing our most anticipated, but unfortunately we have kind of run out of time. So we'll do that in the next episode. But make sure you leave your best films of the year in the comment section down below. What do you think of our lists? And also make sure you leave your own, and we'll have a great discussion about that down below. And as always, guys, I've been Dec.
I've been Ben.
And we hope to see you guys again next time.